This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida, and welcome to my presentation titled The Pride Renewal Tour. This is an abbreviated version of a stand-up presentation I perform on site. I hope you will enjoy it. With this presentation, I want to describe the changes occurring around us, consider how we think, and hopefully reignite pride in ourselves, our work, our institutions, and our culture. Today we see examples of people who lack self-esteem, people who lack pride in their workmanship. In other words, it's just a job to them. And the pride in our national heritage has slipped. Participation in civic organizations and organized religion has diminished. And there is a general apathy in our culture. So the point of this presentation is to consider what has changed, why, and what can be done about it, if anything. We live in a constantly changing world, and it seems we are enjoying it less and spending more time being irritated by others. You notice that the rhetoric is more visceral today. We have protests and boycotts. We worry about the future. Common courtesy has diminished. There are anger issues. And the world is changing at an alarming rate. Let us examine these cultural changes and ask why they are occurring. Let us begin by observing changes in business. In yesteryear, people focused on getting a job done. If this meant working overtime or on weekends, so be it. Today, we tend to be focused on the amount of time spent at the office as opposed to the work product. The concept of lifetime employment appears to be a relic of the past in the 21st century. There are very few of us today who have been with the same company throughout their career. Today, it is more common for people to jump from one company to another in pursuit of a higher-paying job. This means there's no more loyalty. In terms of micromanagement, many managers do not want their employees to think and demonstrate personal initiative. Instead, they are programming their people much like they do a machine in order to control their activities. By doing so, they are grooming a generation of robotic bureaucrats insensitive to the needs of the customers, vendors, and fellow co-workers. Of course, this results in detrimental customer service and an uncooperative workplace. There is more of an inclination today to react to situations as opposed to anticipating and planning for the future. I saw this vividly in the field of information technology, whereas other countries, particularly Asia, think in terms of long-term planning. America is stuck with short-term mentality. Consequently, we are content performing smaller projects as opposed to those at a larger scale. Because of our focus on numbers as opposed to human relations, it means spreadsheets take precedence over customer service, sales calls over sales volume, and in the case of nonprofits, suffocating rules over flourishing membership. Studying numbers is important as it acts like the speedometer and odometer to an automobile, but they're not a substitute for driving. To illustrate, we can drive a car without dials and gauges. We cannot do so the other way around. The job titles of today are quite different than what we had just 10 years ago. Today, there's a tendency to give people a fancy job title as opposed to a decent rate of pay. Banks, for example, are well known for this, where they have a multitude of vice presidents, including an executive vice president, associate vice president, junior vice president, and senior vice president. At our company, M. Bryce & Associates, we had M. Bryce, and everyone else was an associate. Sure, we had different job assignments, but there was no competition for fancy job title. I had a friend working for a company in New England who was making preparations to initiate a major systems project. In anticipation, he began hiring programmers at a respectable rate of pay. Interestingly, he had one gentleman turn him down for the job as he wanted the title of Senior Software Engineer as opposed to mere programmer. It also seems people desperately want to be recognized as a manager of some kind, even where there are no subordinates around. For example, I know a woman in the Midwest who recently was given the title of systems manager. As a systems man, this means something important to me. Typically, it is used to describe a person who must take care of a company's information systems, be it a customer system, financial system, manufacturing system, or whatever. This includes managing a staff of people to maintain and modify such systems. In this case, though, the woman was charged with loading software on the laptops of executives with nobody reporting to her. This is certainly not how I, or the industry in general, define a systems manager, yet she was given the title. Bottom line, we want to be known more by our title as opposed to what we actually produced. These series of photos show the typical dress in the office over the years. The first one in the upper left is what was commonly used from the 1970s to mid-1980s. The photo in the upper right shows what was called Casual Fridays, where employees were allowed to dress down a bit. However, clothing such as t-shirts, jeans, shorts, and gym shoes were not allowed. In the 1990s and early part of the 21st century, the emphasis was on uniform polo shirts with corporate logos to stress the importance of teamwork. The final photo shows the current dress of office. This is an actual group photo of employees at a Tampa, Florida-based business. Notice the shorts, sandals, ripped jeans, t-shirts, tattoos, and facial hair. All of this denotes a change in our sense of professionalism. Whereas companies used to stress the need for a professional image, this is no longer the case. The use of smartphone technology has caused people to observe less etiquette and become more informal in our manner and speech. For example, a new phenomenon called phubbing is used to snub someone you're talking to while looking at your cell phone. Our use of smartphones and text messaging has hindered our ability to write business letters, be it for customer service or sales. This hurts business. And since we rarely write on paper anymore, our handwriting is deteriorating. Cheating has reached pandemic proportions and is now an inherent part of the American culture. According to the Educational Testing Service and the Ad Council, 73% of all test takers, including prospective graduate students and teachers, agree that most students do cheat at some point, and 86% of high school students agreed as well. The song Instant Karma was written in 1970 by John Lennon. During an interview, Lennon commented he wrote the piece as he noticed everything was becoming instant, such as instant coffee, instant soup, instant meals, etc. He mocked the concept by stating instant karma. The song suggests how people want everything instantaneously. It's all about instant gratification and implies a self-serving attitude, not what is best for everybody. This attitude has resulted in e-commerce now favored over physical stores, e-banking favored over paper banking. Student loan debt has surpassed credit card debt. Fitness gyms have surpassed the pharmaceutical industry. Americans spend more time watching TV and playing computer games as opposed to reading, and more independent behavior, less teamwork. This also suggests we are currently doing small things individually as opposed to large efforts as a group. The top portion of this chart shows how U.S. kids younger than 18 years of age are living in a home with two married heterosexual parents in their first marriage. Notice that this has declined from 1960 from 73% going down to 46% today. Notice on the bottom portion, the percentage of U.S. children living with a single parent has grown since 1960 from 9% to 34% today. All of this suggests a growing fear of commitment and responsibility. In a bizarre twist, divorce parties are becoming the rage these days. This is where people celebrate failure by holding a ceremony and party to recognize a divorce. We can only wonder if this means we are becoming hostile to the concept of marriage. If so, what effect will it have on children? Studies show children are more stable and happier in a home with a husband-wife combination as parents. Interestingly, the Center for Disease Control recently reported the youth suicides have skyrocketed 70% over the last decade. In their report, the CDC blamed this on a crisis of meaning in America, which was linked to a decline in religious observation. It's not about money, it's about purpose. Our sense of history and civics is changing in this country. Whereas we used to study ancient history and the founding of America, now it seems history classes in high school are limited to the 20th century. Consequently, young people are less knowledgeable about how American government works. For example, most do not comprehend the genius of the Electoral College as invented by our founding fathers, which is intended to represent people in rural communities equally with larger metropolitan areas. Without the Electoral College, politicians would only concentrate on the country's big cities and ignore the farmlands. There is also the danger of not learning the history of our professional crafts. Without an understanding of such history, there is the possibility young people may repeat the same mistakes of their elders and lose considerable time in the process. Despite a 24/7 news cycle and technology, most people are not informed about current events. Such ignorance leads to apathy in the voting booth. Consider the voting data from the 2016 presidential election. Here we see the total estimated U.S. population was at 326 million. The number of eligible voters was 251 million. The number of registered voters were 200 million. And the number of people registered but did not vote was 92.6 million people, roughly 46% of all registered voters. The fact that only 54% of the people eligible to vote voted in the 2016 election speaks volumes in terms of apathy in the country. Many people believe the system is rigged and the outcome is inconsequential. Truth is, voting is the one act the American citizen has in terms of influencing the direction of our government. Each year, the Gallup organization conducts a poll recognizing our moral inclinations. Two questions are typically asked. Number one, how would you rate the overall state of moral values in this country today? As of 2017, 17% said it was excellent or good. 36% said it's only fair, and 45% said it's poor. The second question is, right now, is the state of moral values in this country getting better or worse? In 2017, 16% said getting better, 7% saying remain the same, and 77% getting worse. Notice in the 5 short years since I've been following this, starting in 2012, the country's outlook is bleaker in terms of the state of morality. According to Gallup, our moral values are becoming much more liberal. For example, years ago, such things as divorce, bankruptcy, having a child out of wedlock, and so on were all considered a horrible embarrassment. Not so anymore. Interestingly, it is not the same overseas, particularly in Asia, where there are only 4% of births out of wedlock. That's in China, India, Japan, and South Korea. There's a reason for this, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. Let us consider the changes of the various generations since World War I. Back then, people were less educated, but they were more informed. Everybody read a newspaper wherever possible. Today, the millennials are more educated, but they're less informed. They have less understanding of current events. Back in World War I, the emphasis was on survival, and today it's on comfort. Whereas the World War I people just 100 years ago had a harder life, now it's much easier. Our moral values have also changed substantially in the last 100 years, and people have become more tolerant of changes. Each generation tries to make life better for the next, but what was condemned in prior generations may now be acceptable in today's world. For example, back in the 17th century, a fiddle was viewed as an instrument of the devil, as it led to dancing, which was considered sinful at the time. Consider how we administered corporal punishment in the home. In yesteryear, the father doled out discipline on the children using a leather belt or shaving strap. Mother used a fly swatter or hickory switch to get their point across. Today, such devices are considered archaic. Instead, we have time out, or suspend the child's use of his or her smartphone, computer, or television. Somehow I think the leather belt was more persuasive than time out, which simply inconvenienced the child. So what is the result? People are withdrawing from social activities and becoming more isolated. Moral institutions are in decline, such as churches and civic-related groups. Schools are under siege. Volunteerism is in decline. There is an emphasis on individualism as opposed to teamwork and cooperation. The male maturation process is stunted. People are staying home and getting married much later. There's intolerance for opposing viewpoints. We lack empathy. Civility is in decline and anger issues. And according to the FBI, violent crime is on the rise. Let's also not forget millennials are experiencing quarter-life crisis brought on by the stress of becoming an adult. Whereas a midlife crisis was typical for people approaching the age of 40, the millennials today are now experiencing this at an earlier age. So what is causing all this? Well, there are 4 areas to consider. First, the role of the media. There's no longer any censorship, inundated with fake news, and the media touts the virtues of sex, violence, and corruption. Second, we have substance abuse and addiction problems, an irresistible urge to get high for escapism purposes. And we also have parental abdication, resulting in delegation of teaching moral values to teachers, coaches, police, media, gangs, managers, military, co-workers, everybody but who should be teaching moral values, which are the parents. And finally, we have technology addiction. In terms of technology addiction, I want to point at 4 different studies. In 2005, a King's College London University study found workers distracted by technology suffer a greater loss of IQ than if they had smoked marijuana. In 2010, The World Unplugged was a global media study led by the International Center for Media and the Public Agenda at the University of Maryland. And interestingly, after just a couple of days without technology, the subjects started to exhibit signs of withdrawal. And finally, an interesting study came out just recently from Dr. Nicholas Carderas, who said studies show technology raises dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with rewards, saying, quote, "Recent brain imaging research is showing that they affect the brain's frontal cortex, which controls executive functioning, including impulse control, in exactly the same way that cocaine does," end quote. Let's move on to how people think and act, starting with perceptions. Like it or not, all of our actions and decisions are ultimately based on our perceptions of reality, regardless if it is correct or fallacious. Hopefully we will perceive reality correctly, but oftentimes we do not, basing our actions and decisions on false assumptions. And as I am an old systems man, I can tell you authoritatively, if the input is wrong, everything that follows will be wrong. So let us understand perceptions, beginning with ourselves. Do we have high or low esteem? Low esteem leads to lack of civility. Let's consider our pride of work. Do we think of ourselves as craftsmen, or is this just another job? According to Arnold Toynbee, he said the supreme accomplishment is to blur the line between work and play. And well, how do we perceive government? Should they solve all of our problems, or do we take personal responsibility for some of these things? In terms of perceptions, let us understand the 4 basic types of personality as derived from industrial psychology: Type A, B, C, and D. Type A is a highly independent and driven personality, typically representing the leaders in business. They are blunt, competitive, no-nonsense types who like to get to the point. Type B represents highly extroverted people who love the spotlight, entertainers and sales types possessing strong charisma. They thrive on entertaining people and are easily hurt if they cannot sway someone. Type C is the antithesis of Type B. Introverted detailists is represented by such people as accountants, programmers, and engineers. They may have trouble communicating to other people, but are a whirlwind when it comes to crunching numbers or writing program code. They tend to be very cautious and reserved, and will not venture into something until all of the facts are known. And finally, Type D. People who resist any form of change and prefer the tedium of routine, such as in clerical assignments. This is typically bureaucrats, and they prefer to be told what to do. So the variables involved with this include such things as risk. Do we have an entrepreneurial spirit, or do we prefer safety? Our personality. Are we extroverted take-charge types or introverted followers? And change. Do we accept new ideas, or do we resist change? And communications. Do we have good communications or poor? Next, let's understand the 3 basic theories of management, X, Y, and Z. Theory X was developed from time and motion studies by Frederick Taylor in the 19th century, best characterized as a top-down autocratic rule. Management believes workers need to be coerced to achieve goals. This is micromanagement. Theory Y was developed from experiments at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Chicago in the 1930s. Management giving special attention to people resulted in improved performance. It assumes people accept and seek responsibility. And the intent here is to manage from the bottom up. In other words, delegate responsibility, train your people properly, and get out of their way. Theory Z was developed by Dr. William Uchi of UCLA based on the study of Japanese businesses during the 1970s. He observed higher productivity because Japanese society encourages mutual trust and cooperation. Best is characterized by cooperation, trust, and group decision-making. Managers will base their style based on perceived workers' intelligence level, motivation, and attitude. Today, people live predominantly in a Theory X world of top-down micromanagement. This means we tend to consider subordinates as careless, irresponsible, and not very bright. We also see signs of Theory X at home where we hear today of helicopter parents who closely monitor their offspring, particularly in college. I've always recommended a Theory Y type of management style whereby we train our workers properly, empower them, and get out of the way. This is what we call managing from the bottom up, whereby we treat employees like professionals and expect them to act as such in return. The only time the manager should get involved is to study their progress and provide advice when problems occur. Theory Y is ultimately saying, manage more, supervise less. Next, let's talk about the corporate culture. Our perceptions of people is ultimately based on such a culture. This consists of the social norms and our moral values. In order for employees to function and succeed in any business, it is essential they understand and believe in the corporate culture. They either adapt or they move on to somewhere else. We also have to understand culture is learned. It can be taught and enforced. The logical side of corporate culture deals with issues such as ethics and methodologies, tools, and techniques for implementing work. From this perspective, it sets the tone of morality. The physical side sets the tone for social norms. It consists of such things as organization, appearances, discipline, and so on. For example, if we work in a sloppy office, we will adopt sloppy characteristics. But if we work in a clean and organized office, this too will be adopted by the employees. Simple things like a coat of paint, temperature, and new furniture and equipment can produce remarkable results. It is saying to the employee, this work is important and we want to invest in you. Workers typically respond positively in return. Next, let's talk about education. Who should be taught? It seems whenever a problem occurs, we look to our government to solve the problem in the form of more laws. This puts responsibility on the shoulders of government as opposed to assuming personal responsibility. The fact is, you cannot legislate everything. Don't we have enough laws that people are ignoring? How about a little education and discipline instead? The problem with education, though, is their emphasis on learning how to test, not how to learn. The purpose of school should be on the latter and not the former. So the questions become, what should we be teaching and who should be taught? In terms of students, we should be talking about communications to promote social skills, both oral and written. We should be promoting reading to promote education, finance and economics to prepare for the future, civics and basic law to learn citizenship and responsibility, history to learn how and why the nation was built and not to repeat mistakes, mental health to diagnose problems, team sports to teach sportsmanship and teamwork, music and other group activities also to promote teamwork, and volunteerism to teach empathy and assuming responsibility. As for parents, they should be taught how to mentor and guide offspring in their journey to adulthood. Next, let's talk about educating morality. Morality is more than just right versus wrong. It's about empathy of others, common courtesy, etiquette, socialization skills. Morality begins with common courtesy. A warm smile, a kind word, a caring handshake, a tip of the hat, and a door held open are all subliminal messages recognizing the value of the human spirit. Such simple lessons promote morality. Next, let's talk about discipline, which is much more than just punishment. It includes assuming responsibility, accountability, and a sense of purpose. Courtesy, craftsmanship, chores, citizenship, and patriotism are all examples of discipline. Some suggest a hitch in the military does wonders for a person in terms of providing structure and a sense of purpose. Some countries, such as Switzerland and Israel, make this a mandatory requirement, but perhaps some simple lessons in discipline can be helpful as well. Let us consider the story of Carolyn Haynes, a school principal at Tendring Technology College in Clacton-on-Sea, Essex in the United Kingdom, a secondary school, ages 11 to 19. They adopted a zero-tolerance policy on student discipline under the premise that bad behavior affects the culture of learning. This resulted in 478 suspensions in 1 year at a school with 1,880 pupils, roughly 25%. Since cracking down on discipline, student passing grades jumped from 48% to 74%. Students are now free to concentrate on their studies, and the school was voted outstanding in every category of school inspection report. This is an excellent example of how discipline can produce tangible, beneficial results. A few years ago, I participated in a business program at the local high school. One day, the teachers appointed a professional attire day, meaning the students in the business program were asked to dress up. Instead of t-shirts, shorts, and gym shoes, they were asked to wear suit and ties for the men and dresses for the ladies. Over 100 people participated. Following this, we developed a questionnaire to determine how the students genuinely felt about dressing up for the day. After tabulating the results, I was surprised by how the students responded. For example, in the first question, did you feel mentally sharper today as a result of dressing up? 75 said yes, 39 said no, and 1 said no answer. Did you feel physically better today as a result of dressing up? 71 said yes, 41 said no, 3 no answer. Did you feel more confident? 83 said yes, 31 said no, 1 had no answer. And finally, did you feel more positive in your outlook? A whopping 93 said yes, 21 said no, and 1 had no answer. Whereas I had expected a rejection of dress codes, I was surprised to learn the students actually wanted a better code than what they currently have, for both students and teachers alike. In summary, they appeared to genuinely take pride in looking their best. They felt more positive and confident when dressed up as opposed to being dressed down. I sense there is currently peer pressure to dress badly. If the student body was allowed to vote on the school's dress code, you would probably be surprised what they would choose, at least with those students involved with the business program. It was obvious to me the students comprehend the effect of a professional image, both in school and beyond. Some genuinely yearn for a better school dress code as opposed to the slovenly appearance which is currently the norm. They may appreciate the concept, but will they be allowed to implement it? Next, let's talk about the need for pride. Are we so self-absorbed that we no longer care what others think of us? I came up with this slide after sitting outside a Walmart and watched people going in and coming out. The Walmartians had very eclectic taste, and frankly, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This led me to ask the rhetorical question, have we given up? If you watch the Walmartians, the answer is yes. Are we so self-absorbed that no longer care what others think of us? Well, maybe so. In terms of pride, we need to lead a worthy and meaningful life. This implies there is dignity in all forms of work. I have much more respect for the janitor who performs his job conscientiously and professionally as opposed to a CEO who cheats his customers and employees. We must simply learn to lead a worthy life. This involves pride in ourselves to promote self-respect and confidence. Pride in our work to produce the finest products and services in the world, thereby improving our earning power. And pride in our communities, institutions, and country. You must teach by example. We need more role models to emulate, to teach attitude, appearances, conduct, professionalism, and honesty. As the caption shows, your words may fall on deaf ears, but you are always being observed. Be a role model. So what's the next step? First, I highly recommend The 5,000 Year Leap by W. Cleon Skousen, which teaches the fundamentals of government. All young people should be required to read it. Next, temper your use of technology. Take control and unplug yourself now and then. Take nothing for granted, as others are trying to manipulate you. Always seek the truth. The power of positive thinking. It's infectious. As for business managers, develop your people skills. Common courtesy, communications, and empathy are incredibly important. Take control of the corporate culture. Reconsider the physical operations of the office, including the methodologies of work. Manage from the bottom up and create corporate loyalty. Create a sense of professionalism and dignity to jobs. Put focus on the work product. Promote craftsmanship. Make sure your staff is properly trained. Eliminate job titles and clocks, and reinstitute dress codes and mentorships. Minimize politics. Promote teamwork, as opposed to rugged individualism. Plan and become proactive as opposed to reactive. Let's not be afraid to tackle big assignments. And will somebody please answer the phone? As for suggestions for home, reestablish the family unit. Do things together, such as meals, chores, sports, vacations, and so on. Teach offspring to work, play, and socialize. Also, it's time for attitude readjustment. The need to recognize and say, this is right and this is wrong. Don't be a friend. Be a parent. It's very important. Other suggestions for home includes teaching the sequence for success, which is based on the research of the Brookings Institute, whereby they say it's important to teach your offspring that you first must get an education, be it a high school diploma, college diploma, or whatever. Then you go to work, start generating money, before you get married, and then before you have children. It's a simple 4-step process. And understand this, those millennials who failed to complete the whole sequence became poor, 53% of them. 31% of millennials who completed high school became poor, but didn't do the rest. 16% of millennials who had a diploma and a full-time job also became poor. But those that went through the whole process in that sequence, education, work, marriage, and offspring, only 3% ever had to declare poverty. Also understand this, because of this inclination, education, work, marriage, and offspring, only 4% of births out of wedlock in China, India, Japan, and South Korea. It's common sense, but unfortunately common sense is not common these days. And for the individual, some simple suggestions. Learn to network. Get active in groups and sharpen your socialization skills, be it in a professional trade group, civic and fraternal organization, a sports club, your place of worship, whatever. And it's time to give back. Try to reach out and help others. And it's not important that we get super involved. If you did just one thing for an organization, large or small, just one thing. If everybody did just one thing, imagine how far ahead we would be. Also, as a good little test, prepare a list of your moral values. What do you believe in? Share this with your family and discuss. Get on the same page. For example, do unto others as I would have others do unto me. In fact, get all of your family members to prepare such values and compare. Let us never be afraid to talk and reason respectfully, especially around the dinner table, in groups, in the office, or in our walk through life. Always seek the truth. Understand the other person's point of view. Do not dismiss it out of hand. It is when we stop talking that war ensues. In this age of political correctness, people suggest not talking about politics around the dinner table, as it might prove upsetting. I grew up in a family where we talked about everything around the dinner table, be it politics, religion, sex, school, business, or whatever. By having open communications, we formed strong bonds with our parents. So in order to build pride, we need faith in the human spirit, that people will respond positively if the proper environment is established. The will to do what is right, representing confidence in our integrity, and the tenacity to be our best, our willpower. I'm always mindful of this quote from Lawrence Gould, the president emeritus of Carleton College, who said, quote, I do not believe the greatest threat to our future is from bombs or guided missiles. I don't think our civilization will die that way. I think it will die when we no longer care. Arnold Toynbee has pointed out that 19 of 21 civilizations have died from within and not from without. There were no bands playing and flags waving when these civilizations decayed. It happened slowly, in the quiet and the dark, when no one was aware." End quote. I learned of this quote when I was in college. I am mindful of this haunting thought as I love America and want to see it succeed. I would like to thank you for taking the time to review this presentation. I am available for on-site presentations on this subject as well as roundtable workshops. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at area code 727-871-6115 or look me up on the internet at timbryce.com. That's BRYCE. Friends, keep the faith.